2, and I think we might begin our program for this afternoon. We can begin it the same way we began it this morning, and that is by asking the people in the back row to work their way a little farther forward. You'd be surprised how far it is between the speaker and the last row. And if you see some smiling faces in between, why, or she sees some smiling faces in between, she appreciates it, I'm sure. Let's see. I'm a great believer in exercise. How many people were here this morning? I see one or two. Oh, all right. And we talked this morning about the purpose of an alumni college and how we are pleased to be able to try to offer one here. And this morning we talked about the impact of business education. And the people who spoke this morning said that the American woman was emancipated by the typewriter. And because of this emancipation, it caused all kinds of interesting situations to come up, and this gives us an opportunity to talk about the changing role of the woman, the American woman, I presume. And Dr. Mildred Ballou of our Department of Education is going to present some ideas on that subject. And then to ask her questions or to respond to your questions, we have with us Mr. Ben Irvin, who's chairman of our curricular advisors, Mr. Charles McNaughton, who's director of our placement services. And again, as this morning, there are two aspects to this program. The first half of it is a presentation, but the second half we hope will be a good seminar-type discussion in which you will ask lots of questions and you will pump the speaker and the two resource people. So may I at this time introduce Dr. Mildred Ballou, who will talk to us about the changing role of woman.
First off, I think I really ought to report to you that a couple of very unnerving things have happened to me in connection with this assignment that I have had to speak with you today. First off, it seems that the Alumni magazine, which you received, has pictures of professors on the cover, and I seem to be the only one who is not going to be Professor Emeritus as of tomorrow at noon. Now, I think I can interpret this as a diabolical plan, maybe instigated by students, maybe by my colleagues, and then on the other hand, it may have even been instigated by alums. I shudder to think of that. The second horrible thing that happened in connection with this is that on the poster just outside of the president's office, there is this little blurb about today, and it mentions that a Dr. Milfred Ballou is going to be speaking this afternoon. So if the real Dr. Milfred Ballou will please stand, then I could sit down and we could go on. Now, of course, the first is an attempt to retire me before I even got tenure. The second is an attempt to run in a male replacement, and it is with this persecution complex that I speak with you today. Seriously, it is a real honor and a privilege and a pleasure for me to discuss with you people, a group of distinguished alums, the changing role of woman. As I thought about putting together a speech for today, I was reminded of what my speech professors have taught me down through the years, and some of these things came to mind. The first was that a speech to be immortal does not have to be eternal. Now, I don't know why my professors felt it necessary to point this out to me particularly, probably because, generally speaking, women are generally speaking. Another on this same subject said that a speech should be somewhat like a girl's skirt. It should be short enough to be interesting, but long enough to cover the subject matter. And I hope that's the kind that I have prepared today. Another advised against preparing a manuscript and then sticking tightly to it. He said it's sort of like making love through a picket fence. You hear everything all right, but the contact is not too good. Even our Steve, our son, who is 11, was concerned about this speech I was going to give today, and he said, "Mother, is this going to be a Sanka speech or a Maxwell House speech?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, a Sanka speech has 90% of the bean removed, and a Maxwell House is good to the last drop." This subject of the changing role of women is one of vital interest to some of you and of rather passive interest to others. I'm well aware of that. The subject itself does not have the universal appeal that one such as how to make $1 million without really trying would have. So what I have is simply here for you, and I mention it because I have a story in connection with that, and this is kind of one way to drag that story in by the tail. This is the story of the young teacher, probably a young man who had just graduated from Ball State, who got married and took his wife to this hotel where they spent a week. He was very, very poor, and they went down the street and ate at hamburger places, and they ate at pizza places. And when the end of the week came and it was time for him to pay his bill, he presented himself to the hotel clerk, and the clerk said, well, this will be $200. $200, he said, that's an amazing amount of money, considering that we just had a very poor room, and we didn't make very many telephone calls or anything. Well, the fellow said, you're aware that this is an American plan hotel, and you could have eaten all of your meals here, and I trust you did that. No, the fellow said, we didn't do that, and so, of course, you won't charge us for that. Well, the hotel clerk said, it was here for you, so I'm afraid I do have to charge you for it. Well, the young man went up to his room to get some more money, and he came down, and then he presented the hotel clerk with a bill, and on it said, this is $25 for kissing my wife. And the hotel clerk said, but I didn't kiss your wife. And he said, I can't help that. It was here for you. This, then, is here for you, and I guess that leads us rather naturally into the question, is the role of woman really changing? Are roles of men and children also changing? If so, how and why? What facts are available regarding roles of modern-day women? What forces seem to be causing these changes? In what way are these cultural changes likely to affect your life as a husband, yours as a wife, or yours as a career woman? What significance do the facts and predicted trends have regarding the education of students on the Ball State campus? How strong is the family-career trend, and what does it mean to you as a college graduate who might be thinking of going back into the teaching profession or some other profession? These are some of the questions that I would like to discuss with you today. One does not really need to consult with the U.S. Labor Department to conclude that women's roles are changing. Women seem to be everywhere. They are running charities, they are teaching school, they are driving taxi cabs. We have women dentists, women vets, engineers, financiers, ambassadors, legislators, scientists, bank presidents. The female seems to have invaded on every front. The difficulty of discussing cultural changes influencing women's lives is that the subject itself has no definable limits. Obviously, the changing concepts of women's roles are inextricably tied up with the changing concepts of the place of men and of children in our society. And all of these are interwoven in the overall changes taking place in American life itself. The social psychologists tell us that among the goals of American life, these three are indeed very strong. Because these are goals of American life, we begin socializing children from the moment of birth, heading them in the direction of the achievement of these three things. We want them to be cooperative. We teach them that getting along with other people is tremendously important. We want them to learn to work and play without friction with other people. This goal, of course, has many facets. It means that we teach them friendliness. We teach them to be some kind of a social self that results in their becoming joiners. Togetherness has become so much a part of our way of life that we have Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, Brownies, all of these things for children to go to. Little League, Cotillion, 4-H. We see homes being built without much privacy. Doors are not put on here and there. The club car on the train. There are all sorts of evidences that we put a good bit of emphasis on togetherness in our current society. Is it possible that we socialize both boys and girls so strongly here. We teach them the right thing to do and the right thing to wear in social groups so that they will enjoy people, that this very thing may make it difficult for a woman to spend long hours at home, particularly after the children have gone. And these things may also send her in search of togetherness, drinking coffee or cocktails with the girls, bridge clubs, careers, any one of dozens and dozens and dozens of things. A second goal of American life is independence, we are told. Now, both this cooperative goal and this goal of independence is reflected on the report cards we give to our children, aren't they? We mark, gets along well with others, and we start this in kindergarten. We also mark, works independently, and we start that in kindergarten. We sort of like, in our society, the person who has learned to stand on his own 2 feet. I read somewhere recently about the politician who got up and said, "I'm sorry I can't report that I was born in a log cabin, but we moved into one as soon as we could afford it." In the 30s, the time of the Great Depression, the ideal man was supposedly the one who refused government aid and shined shoes or did something, you see, to earn a bit of money for himself. We saw Maury Amsterdam, the comedian, down in Indianapolis, I guess last year, and he said that the current research on indicates that this recession is on such a high level that the people who are waiting in bread lines have transistor toasters under their arms. We teach our young people not to let others infringe on their rights. If a toy is taken from a young child, we teach him to get it back, you see. We frown a good bit on tattling because we want him to become self-reliant. Perhaps then we have done such a good job of this with socializing both boys and girls that we have taught girls to go after the things they want, to get a job and work and get a college degree, to go after a husband. Perhaps this is so well done that she finds it difficult after marriage to be the dependent, helpless female that sometimes society expects one to be. I don't know. Maybe that is a problem. Third, a third goal of our society is success. And whether we like it or not, we tend to spell it with a dollar sign. I am reminded of the time I was riding back on a plane and I picked up a copy of Sports Illustrated. And there was a story of Floyd Patterson, the fighter, being interviewed by someone, and it seems that his manager was discouraging him from getting into another fight very soon. And Patterson walked over to the window, and on the condensation on the window he drew a dollar sign, and the interviewer asked him what he was doing, and he said, "I'm only trying to see out." I don't think this was meant to be philosophical in that article, but in our American life, so many times we feel that the way to see out is through the dollar sign. Lyons did a study to determine what success means to college seniors, and this is what they answered. They said, "We don't want a lot of money, but success does mean enough money to do these things, and I would bet these things are not too different from your definitions of success." They want enough money to have a car of fairly recent vintage. They want a household with reasonably modern appliances. They want enough money for a college education for their children. They want some vacations away from home. They want some private lessons for their children, piano lessons particularly, and maybe some in the area of sports or dancing. They want wardrobes at least as good as their neighbors. These young people did not see the highly talented but starving musician or artist as successful. In our culture, you see, we tend to think that if he is really successful, he can sell one of those things. How do we push children toward this goal of success? We teach them that the route to it is work, 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 and that succeeding in school is one way to get there. We encourage kids to get jobs, mowing lawns, babysitting, and jobs in summer camps. But we don't want these jobs to interfere with academic success. Now, while certain aspects of the pursuit and attainment of these goals is not identical for men and women, parents do have some goals for their daughters that are similar, if not identical, to the goals they have for their sons. One of these is to achieve in school. Teachers, too, encourage, persuade, reward, reevaluate, in every way help motivate girls to get good grades, and you know they do. They have a tendency to outdo boys as far as grades. All through high school, the change doesn't become apparent until sometime during the college work. Aspirations for academic achievement are high in our culture, and herein, I believe, lies the beginning of one of modern-day woman's conflicts. She has been taught the values of being attractive, to be successful in social groups, and to be intellectually competent and academically successful. She enters college with two motives: to do well in studies and to get a husband. There is no question among those of us who work with young people about which is the stronger. Philip Jacob did a study for the Hazen Foundation in which he interviewed college students, and he found that 84% of the college women consider marriage of supreme importance for happiness in later life. Our culture, though, no longer gives to young women a clear-cut, precise pattern for their lives. A student from Radcliffe said this: "I feel that a college education tends to make a woman discontented with domestic life, as it may open up new lines of thought and stimulate a woman to thinking that there is more to life than having a family and keeping house." Not discrediting these two, but more. Kierkegaard said, I think, about the same thing in a little different way. He said, "To venture causes anxiety, but not to venture is to lose oneself." Today's young woman has also witnessed a change in the meaning of masculinity and femininity. Men are not less masculine than they were, nor are women less feminine than they were, according to the psychologists, but social demarcation of what is appropriate behavior for each sex has changed. It has changed most drastically, as one would suspect, among the educated groups. On the MF scale, educated men and educated women tend to score closer to the center than to the extremes. There was an article on creativity in the Phi Delta Kappan this spring. I don't remember just what issue, but in this article, the author mentioned that education seemed to, that the creative man and the creative woman seemed to score closer to the center of the poles on masculinity and femininity than did their less creative cohorts. Well, this might suggest that education gives some kind of freedom and security to men to enjoy such things as ballet and poetry reading and gourmet cooking, which less educated men might consider feminine, you see. And by the same token, then, we find women who may not feel it to be a threat to their femininity to enjoy such things as golf and bowling, science, math, or working outside the house. I recall last fall, a year ago last fall, just after we came to the campus, the Nespers, who lived across the street from us, were having a coffee for their student teachers, and they had asked me to drop in for just a minute, so I went in. I should say here that you must excuse the personal experience, and I tossed that in because I thought of the girl who said this in my class, and she said, "Excuse me for mentioning a personal experience, but they're the only kind I've had." Well, me too. So I dropped by for just a minute, and then Mrs. Nesper reported that after I left, one of the students said, "Is that Dr. Ballou?" And she said, "Yes." And the student said, "Well, I didn't expect her to look like that. I thought she'd be tall, dark, and domineering." And I guess they were kind of surprised to find that I was short, red-headed, and domineering. Roles of men have indeed changed. They are taking more responsibility with the family. We find, for the first time, in 1962, more male school teachers in the secondary schools than female. The change has been a gradual one since 20 years ago. We find more elementary men in elementary schools than we used to. Certainly, it's still predominantly an area for women. And I'm reminded of the man who went to teachers' convention and was attempting to get a room at the hotel. And the clerk said, "I don't have a room for you, but I'll tell you what I can do. I could let you share this room with a blonde school teacher." And the young man drew himself up to full stature and said, "Sir, I am a gentleman." And the hotel clerk said, "Sir, so is the blonde school teacher." Men are working in areas where often women used to work. And they used to be predominantly female jobs, you see. Margaret Mead always has a good bit to say about the changing role of woman. And she has a new book coming out in September to be published by Beacon Press called Women in Mass Society. There was a short report of this in the Post, I think the March 3rd, 1962 issue. And in this article, she mentioned that much of the work that used to be done by women is now being done by the male. She mentioned, for example, that midwifery has now been taken over by the male obstetrician, that the care of sick children that used to be done by the woman years and years ago has been taken over now, you see, by the male pediatrician, that bathing the dead used to be one of the jobs of woman. It is now turned over to the mortician, and she says that even visiting the widowed has been taken over by the male insurance agent. Orphan children are not as often taken care of by women in a home, you see, as they are by institutions. Even old people are not brought into the home for care as they used to be. So these areas of service in which a woman could somehow get a feeling of self-worth are gone. And perhaps it is this vacuum that has been one of the forces that has created this change in the role of woman. Margaret Mead also has something to say about women in science, which I feel is tremendously significant. Across my desk the day before yesterday came a copy of Chemical and Engineering News, and I noticed that they reported that less than 7% of the scientists in America are women. This is a smaller number than one would find in European countries today. Margaret Mead says that if we are to have a world in which human beings can live, we need more science activity, not less. That women have made their greatest contributions in the field of human sciences. That we perhaps need women in the fields of natural and physical sciences if we want to change the picture from one of overemphasis in science on power and underemphasis on human values. I think this points up the need for women who think like women and not like men. I sat by a DuPont chemist at a luncheon some time ago in which we were discussing the number of women chemists that they employed. And he said, we were talking about one particular person that had applied that they had not hired. He said, well, we didn't hire her for two reasons. One, she tends to think like a man, and if we wanted someone to think like a man, we would hire a man. We have a good many men chemists. Secondly, he said, we want we know that if we're going to keep a good many women interested in joining our force, they should be women who are a bit more feminine than this one was. I thought that was interesting, coming from a personnel man from DuPont. Well, what are the forces then that have given impetus to the changes in the roles of women? I suppose one is the socialization process of children that I have suggested. One, this freedom that comes with education, freedom to maybe pursue roles that may have been considered masculine or feminine by either group. I imagine another is women's not being able to satisfy some of those needs that Margaret Mead mentioned through services of midwifery and so forth. And the fourth is the need for women's brain power and their particular way of thinking in certain fields. Now add to this the fact that these changes have taken place in the lives of women. In 1957, the average marrying age for a woman was 20. Although in the upper middle classes it was above this oft-quoted 20 that we are still hearing. In 1890, woman was marrying at age 22 instead, 22. The last child was born, these are averages now, in 1957, to the wife of 1957, when she was 26. In 1890, 32. The youngest child goes to school when a modern woman is 32. In 1890, woman was 39 before her youngest child went to school, average age. Modern woman is 48 when the youngest child marries, as compared to 55 in 1890. Modern woman is 61 when her husband dies, as compared to 53 in 1890. She is expected now to live to age 77. In 1890, her lifespan was expected to go to 60. Gradually, then, because of some of these things, a new pattern in women's lives has emerged. This pattern seems to be school, work, marriage, and then work until the first baby. And up until this point, there seems to be no conflict in woman's life. You see, we expect her to go to college, don't we? Or we expect her, if she doesn't go to college, to get a job. We have given up the idea that the man must have enough money in his hand when he asks for her hand to support her through early days of marriage. Now a girl expects to work a while. This has become commonplace, you see. And when she has her babies, she knows what she is and what she is about. At no other time is woman so sure of what it means to be woman. At no other time does she enjoy the unanimity of expectations of those people around her. Everybody approves of motherhood. She may, though, as time goes on, feel somewhat confined as she spends time doing the chores that need to be done around the house with young children. But nonetheless, modern woman works only sporadically when children are young. You see, this is a middle-class problem. This is not an upper-class problem, because in upper classes, women can get away from children all the way around the world away from children if things tend to close in on them. This is not true, you see, for the middle-class woman. The next major punctuation point in feminine life is the time when the last child goes to school, or when the last child is 8, 18, at whatever psychological moment this woman recognizes an empty nest at home. If she realizes and feels this way when her youngest child goes to school, this means that she has 30 years before retirement age. It means that after that last child has gone to school, she has a life expectancy of 45 years before death. It is at this point, then, that women tend to create new careers, to re-enter the labor market. This is when some women increase involvement in less remunerative but equally satisfying jobs, community affairs. Others apply for readmission in college. Others go to graduate school. How extensive is this trend? Back to work. Did you know that today women comprise, I hope they also compromise, women comprise 1/3 of the labor market. President Kennedy thought that this was so amazing and so important that he has created, a new job in the Department of State, that of consultant on women's activities. I wanted to slyly mention that maybe the activities of the Kennedy women prompted him to do that, but I thought I'd not mention that. 57%, and these statistics, incidentally, I got from that department. 57% of the women who are working today, 50% of the 57% of the women who have graduated from college are working today. More than half of our living college graduates have a job. Of the non-college group of women, only 37% are working. Even during child-rearing years, the 1962 statistics indicate that 53% of the college-educated women are working. Now, switching the picture a little bit and putting all the working women together, we find that of this total group working, 60% are married women, 25% are single, and 15% are widowed, divorced, or separated. I guess then that one might conclude that one way you could cut down on the number of people leaving home would be to not educate the woman. Here again, we run into some problems, though. Sociologists tell us that marriages are happiest where a husband and wife have roughly comparable amounts of education. Only 1/3 of our college students in 1962 are women across the country. If this trend continues, then for males who want a college-educated wife, there are only half enough to go around. I think a good many of these males don't want to be caught in the embarrassing situation of the young junior executive who married a not right, bright, beautiful wife. They were at a dinner party, and his boss said something about the Magna Carta, and she didn't want to be completely left out of the conversation, so this poor, pitiful person said, I think I remember reading something about the Magna Carta. I think that what I read was something like this, that one day in about 1519, Queen Elizabeth was riding bareback down the street on her horse when she met Sir Walter Raleigh. Sir Walter Raleigh removed his coat and draped it around the Queen and shouted, E pluribus unum, which is French for your need is greater than mine. Vincit omnia veritas, replied the grateful Queen, which is French for my soul, I think you're right. And this incident is known, I think she said, as the Magna Carta. Education does other things for people, too. The child psychologists tell us that educated women are better mothers. Graduates themselves tell us that they can live more satisfying lives as a result of having education. More and more leaders in community affairs are college women. We at Ball State are committed to, I think, doing two things. First, developing students who have rich, meaningful lives while they're here and after they leave our campus. And secondly, to developing the best teacher, the best accountant, and so forth, that we know how to develop. To do this, I think we have to have a realistic view of the world into which tomorrow's graduate literally walks. If this is a normal group, 84% of those women who walk across the stage tomorrow will marry. More than half of them will work 27 years. How does one prepare a student for that kind of life? I think we do it in several ways. I think we do it by making of them, if we can, perpetual students. Obviously, if we reduce education to the level where it is merely a regurgitation of facts, which may in effect even be changed, you see, by the time they go back into the job market, we have failed. We have made it very, very difficult, unless we have made them perpetual students, we have made it difficult for them to re-enter a profession. And when we recognize that this is one of the needs these young women are going to face, I don't think we can afford to close our eyes to this fact. I think probably another way that we are doing it is by providing both models and counselors for young women. Maybe some of you read the article, let's see, Pressures on Modern Women, that appeared in the Atlantic Monthly. Let's see, Carl Binger was the author of that, and it appeared, January or February, I would guess. But he mentions that one of the real needs for women on college campuses now is to have someone to talk over the kinds of problems that they can already anticipate having, because there appears to be a dichotomy in their lives. Well, I think maybe we at Ball State are providing both models and counselors for this. It's very dangerous to name some people, but I have never been one, I guess, to value safe living too much, and so I'm going to do that. Some of you know Dr. Masho. I think she does this, and does it well. I could mention Mrs. Hewitt, you see, who would be an example of a married woman whose children are reared, who would really understand the girl who comes back to college when she's 35 and wants to take more college work or go back into a profession. We have Dr. Sorensen, who I think is a marvelous example, and Dr. Clifton, I could name a good many others, of how very, very happy one can be in a profession, how very feminine one can be in a profession if one does not marry, you see. We have Mrs. Burkhardt, who works part-time. We have Mrs. Emmons, who is taking work on a master's degree. Now, each of these things seems relatively insignificant, but it isn't in the lives of our students. They mention them, you see, because here they can see somebody who is doing the kind of thing that they strongly suspect they might want to do themselves sometime, you see. I think another way that we help this situation is by calling attention to this trend. I think we need to do this for both our males and our females on campus. I think it takes a very secure male to be able to stand a successful wife, and that maybe we ought to warn some of these young men who will be marrying college graduates that this could be one of the problems if the wife goes back to work. This book, The Educated Woman, is a cartoon book that I have found quite fascinating. And here on this page is a picture of a couple, and they are looking at their college daughter who is with her fiancé, and the mother says, "I knew she'd be right for him. She's a typical future family-oriented underachiever." I think then that we need to call attention among both males and females that there are certain advantages and certain problems involved when one chooses as a wife a college woman. I think we need to recognize that the battle of the sexes will never end. There's just too much fraternizing with the enemy for that to happen. But there are certain conditions that seem to contribute to the flame. One of these conditions, I think, is women who feel persecuted and thwarted in a man's world. I think this is sheer and utter nonsense. Never have women had so much opportunity. You know, Madame Pandit, who is Nehru's sister, says that in America, women have so much opportunity, but they really aren't doing very much with it. And she suggests that maybe women are a little bit lazy and reluctant to take a hold of the opportunity that they really have. So I can't really sympathize too much with the woman who feels that she is really being thwarted because this is a man's world. I think she has much opportunity, more probably than she can use. The second condition that I think contributes to this flame is the man who is threatened by a too bright woman, a too bright wife, a too bright woman colleague, or horrors, a too bright woman boss. Prejudice, you see, grows out of attitude. And I think we have more prejudices than those regarding religion and race. But I am also equally convinced that we have just as many prejudices among women regarding a man's world as we do among men regarding a women's world. Fortunately, these prejudices in all of these areas are breaking down most rapidly among the educated group. Also, I think we need to make our young women aware of things to consider upon regarding their reentry to a profession. One would be, and I think there must be a good many people in the room who have considered each of these. One I would think would be the effect upon their families, the effect upon children. I don't think anyone can answer this for all families and for all time. It varies according to the needs of the children and to the husband. The statistics, you know, regarding the effective marriages, the successful marriages, and whether or not the wife works, indicate that they're least likely to be successful if the wife wants to work and the husband doesn't want her to, or if the reverse should be true. But there seems to be no problem when the husband wants her home and she's there, or when she wants to work and he doesn't care if she works and she goes ahead and works. So it isn't the working or the not working, you see, it's the attitudes of both. What's more, I think if a husband is against it, you simply can't fight City Hall, and it's ridiculous to try. The second thing I think one should consider realistically when one thinks about going back into a profession is the woman's energy and her efficiency level. For some women, these kinds of things seem to work out and work rather well. Some women have energies that need to be directed in some worthwhile activity. For others, this would be so completely frustrating that it would never work. Then, of course, I think one should consider the types of jobs that are available and what these jobs will pay. Now, all of these things being okay, I can report that all things regarding reentry, all systems are go and A-okay. I wish for those of you who are considering reentry every success, mainly that you find meaning and richness and direction and happiness in your life, whether you return to work or not. Because you had the advantage of a college education, the world ought to be somewhat better than it would have been had you not had that opportunity. As you come and go as alums of Ball State, of this institution, you serve an ambassadorship for this college, one of which we are very proud, because you see, each of you who is a graduate is one of our hallmarks, proof that we cared enough to send the very best. Thank you.
very poor homes or homes where education doesn't have the same meaning. And the girl, the woman or the girl coming up in school, where is she a misfit in this whole picture? Is her life ahead of her just to be sort of torn between what she would like to be if she were in the middle or upper class? Is that one of the things that's causing some of our young people to go into, well, needs for psychiatric help and that type of thing? As a teacher, I think it's not an alumnus of a university or college. We're teachers and we have to meet these problems with our children. And we get children from all levels. And we get children from that area who come to college, that I know. We have a few very fine young people who come out of the slums. And they make good. But their background doesn't permit them to go back into it. And many people in the middle class and upper class will not accept the person's background, such as hers or his. Don't we have a large group of people in that class?
I can't answer your question, Margaret, because I don't really know. Logically, it would seem yes, we certainly do. However, the work that I have done in relation to this has been specifically directed toward the college person and the alum.
Well, I realize that in your talk. I keep going back to these children as a teacher. We're training teachers to meet the needs of these children in the present day world.
I suppose one of the examples of an attempt to meet this need would be the number of opportunities that these kids now have to learn such skills as vocational skills in high school, this sort of thing. Someone else like to
Perhaps Mr.
speak to that?
Your experience as a high school principal to respond to that question.
I don't know that I can respond to that particular question. It seems to me, and maybe you're expressing somewhat the same feeling, that a fairly large segment of our population, and particularly women, probably are not going to be able to do much more than serve in their roles as members of a family, parents, this type of thing.
Okay.
Right. And oftentimes, I think the materials presented here this afternoon would indicate that these people are not working as they get older or as they are relieved of their family responsibility. I would like to have an up-to-date study of family size. I understand that the people in the middle and upper areas of society are now reproducing at a much greater rate than they were some 15, 20 years ago. We have a tendency to think maybe in terms of the fact that these people low on the economic ladder or the social ladder may be the ones which are reproducing at a greater level, and this could possibly still be true. If this is true, then it seems to me these youngsters are not going to be given the opportunity to go on, get an education, and change position. So we not only are holding the mother within the pattern of her social structure for a longer period of time, but there is less help available to these youngsters from the parent. I was going to comment, if I may, on this question of cooperation. I believe it was one of the three major points that was made. We talk about togetherness, cooperation. In our schools, we teach cooperation. Heard a person comment one time. He said, you know, this cooperation thing is real fine. We all believe in it. We all talk about it. We try to get people to cooperate. The one place in society that we penalize people for cooperating is in the classroom. And I would guess that all of us have been guilty. Just get a shared answer on a test and see what it does to the poor teacher. And here you've been teaching this togetherness and cooperation all the way along. And the youngsters cooperate and it throws us completely in a tailspin. We just haven't anticipated, or at least have not wanted, this kind of behavior to happen. Moving on from the point of cooperation, we talked about the psychological impact on women, on society, on youngsters, even on the male as to where he fits into this social pattern. I'm wondering if we have moved very rapidly in changing what society expects of people, or whether we're still talking with people, advising people, and rearing youngsters in view of what we feel society expects of them. Maybe this was an expectation of 20 or 25, 30 years ago. I'd like to illustrate with just 2 points. One would be in the area of industrial arts education. You people who are in the public schools, what do you do when you have that bright young lady who says, I think I'm going to be an architect, I want to take mechanical drawing? I ask you, what do you do with her? Do you let her go take mechanical drawing and be the only young lady in the class, or do you, or your counselor, visit with her a while and say, well, now, this class is composed entirely of men. This is primarily a man's function. It just might create a little problem if you were in this class. Don't you think you'd rather spend time in art working with perspective or something along this line? Are we guilty of this? What happens at the college? Occasionally some young woman comes along and says, I want to take mechanical drawing. Are we sure where we stand, and are we sure why we stand where we do stand? And then move into the field of science and mathematics. It's been pointed out that young women mature socially and perhaps intellectually at a greater rate than young men, at least during the earlier years. We would like to think that the men catch up with them somewhere during the college experience as far as this is concerned. We've also pointed out that, 7% of our scientists, mathematicians are women. Is there some special aptitude a person must have to be successful in science and mathematics, or have we as teachers and as society sort of set this little area aside for the men and said to the women, look, you're better in the fields that involve reading skills, social skills. Why don't you take foreign language, social studies, English? Let's let the men take the mathematics and physics. Have we really talked with women from the standpoint of, gee, here is a field. Here's one of the great fields of opportunity. You have lots of ability. Your scholastic record is good. How about taking some mathematics, some science? I think the question maybe I'm trying to ask in a roundabout way is, do we as society tend to steer these youngsters away from roles where women could be quite successful?
No, Judge, broken so well. Who would like to ask a question?
Feel on a different level. Teaching a practical nursing school, I do have many students that are in their 30s and 40s and so forth, and I really am often interested in their comments about what their families think about them. And these are some of the people from what you can tell me lower economic group, and they all seem to feel the need for more training. I heard more than one mother say, well, now when I come home with my books and say, well, my kids realize that studying is important too. And that they all seem to be wanting to improve themselves. So I think we can fairly need an area where we can. Because practical nursing today, although it's senior science, we get a lot of those things. So I think there's a great need, and they really feel like they want something. And I think we can do that.
Is this last resort, Dean? You're calling on me? Well,
kind of anxious to get up here. Whenever I see a mic or anything to say or not, I automatically get up and start using them. So I probably would eventually. Now, about 4 or 5 years ago, talking about the change in women and so forth, we had a Dean of Student Affairs here that wanted to decorate the campus a little bit more than we had it decorated by the feminine part of the campus. And so he was trying to get them to look feminine, trying to dress feminine. He thought that would be quite an improvement. You can't rather go around slacks and that sort of thing. He started quite a campaign, and I never forget, he stopped this beautiful young lady in the lobby of the ad building over here, and she was dressed in tight shorts and a tight sweater, and he started to bawl her out and told her how much nicer she'd look if she dressed feminine and so forth. And then he got feeling sorry for himself, so he turned to her father, standing right there, and says, "I'm sorry about bawling out your daughter. How do you feel about your daughter?" He says, "Well, I can't answer that because I'm her mother." But changing role there, you see. But actually, question was made here about one of the primary purposes of women coming to college is to get a husband. I actually subscribe to that because that's one of my big headaches. I remember when I was in college, after we were out 3 or 4 years, we'd go to the bank and double check, see if we had enough money to get the license and even start thinking about marriage. But that isn't true anymore. They marry at the freshman and sophomore level. They have maybe enough money for a trailer. If you go north of our campus, it's half full of trailers up there. We're building constantly on new apartments. And these girls do get married at the freshman and sophomore levels. I think it's just surprising to me, and I marvel at how they make it. It's just sensational. But my headache comes after they graduate, because they all come in and I'll have 300 want monthly only. Why? Well, my wife put me through school, now I have to put her through school, and I must stay here. So that is going on constantly. The wife will quit school and help him through the last couple of years, and then he gets a job and puts her through. Now that's a new trend, which is causing a headache in our place. But there's so many wonderful opportunities for girls now. If I were a woman just starting out, I could think of a number of things which you might... my neighbor, Mr. Pickrell, runs the business colleges around, and we were out talking the other day about the tremendous need. And I says, "Bob, what do you do besides run all these schools?" He says, "Well, I teach the final course in secretarial training." And he says, "You know what my final exam is?" And I know. He says, "I chase a girl around the room, and if I can catch her, she's not ready to go out yet." And, that wasn't too... It was doubly funny to me because I'd placed a girl just 2 weeks earlier in an office in town here, and she couldn't run fast enough, and she quit in 2 weeks. But that amused me. So then let's see, I was trying to think of another. Oh yes, we had a superintendent coming in. An elementary teacher today can almost point to the map, and we can place them. There's tremendous opportunities for ladies there. Now, this superintendent, I said, "Well, how do you interview?" He said, "Well, it's this technique I use in getting elementary teachers." He said, "I sit on the same side of the table with them, and if they have everything I think they need and everything, I put my arm around her, and if she pulls away, says I hire her. That's the kind we need." Now, he says, if I put my arm around her and they cuddle up to me, he says, I hire that one too, because we need that kind too. But there's all kinds of techniques that's used over there. Now, here are some of the calls we're now getting. It might be of interest to you. In guidance, for instance, I have had only 2 women in my office wanting to be guidance counselors. I've had over 300 requests for those 2 women. And they can go any place they like. We need a tremendous number there. Of course, elementary. I'll never cease to understand. I thought 20 years, 30 years ago, I would say, I knew how I could outthink or outsmart a woman, and how much wrong I found. The older I get, the less I know about women, because I invited what I thought would be excellent people to have on our campus to interview women. One was from the embassy service, overseas service. They need all types of trained women to go overseas and live in these embassies and meet all these interesting people and go to these countries and all expenses paid. And I didn't have that first girl on our campus interested, and I was so embarrassed. I thought I'd jump at an opportunity like that. Wonderful opportunity. Then the CIA, Central Intelligence Service, needed girls. 2-year secretaries, 4-year secretaries, or graduates, all levels, to go overseas and act in Central Intelligence Services. Not one. There's wonderful opportunities there if you're the adventuresome type, and I guess I happen to be that type. But then special education. There's hardly a day that we do not get 8 or 10 calls for special education to go into the schools and work with maybe only 2 or 3 students. I admit you have to have the desire to want to do that type of thing, but the demand is tremendous. This year we have only 1 woman trained in special education. We get 8 or 10 requests a day. And you can almost name your place and your salary in that particular field. Same way in, English, for instance. You'd hardly believe a shortage exists in English. We can hardly find them. You can just about name your place there. And of course, foreign language. Speech and hearing. We just can't find candidates for that. Women to go in, elementary supervisors. The demand is tremendous for that. We haven't any candidates registered in our office. We have, let me see, the other fields. Elementary, well, of course, girls phys ed. We always start off with quite a large class in freshman and sophomore levels. Then they all drop out. I couldn't understand why. We'll get maybe 400 or 500 requests for girls phys ed, and I'll have maybe only 4 or 5 that finish. Same way with music. Music, there's a tremendous demand for music at all levels. But you're getting back to girls phys ed. I thought I'd check on and see what happened. Well, as you say, they come here primarily to get a husband. And I said, what's that got to do with girls phys ed? Well, it has a lot to do, because every day you take physical education. You go over and you take a shower, your hair droops down, and then you can't make the right contacts when you're looking like a spook, you know. But that was one of the main reasons given, because they had to take a shower every day, and it made them look droopy. So they drop out, you know. But those are just a few of the fields that if I were going in training and were women today, I would think about some of those. Do you have any questions?
I think she could answer it, but I would really like to know how it is a woman thinks differently about chemistry than a man.
I'm not at all sure that I know how. You see, I don't know how a man thinks about chemistry. Maybe that's one of the problems that's involved. But I think that the thing that this fellow that I was talking with was talking about was the very thing that Margaret Mead was talking about, in that it seems that men who are chemists that they employ have a tendency to think, of course, in terms of power, uses of power that can be made of chemicals, utilitarian uses that don't quite have the same touch that utilitarian uses as a woman sees them would have. I mean now things such as fabrics. Men aren't often quite concerned about the need for a shirt that is really a drip-dry shirt, you see. The chemistry that's involved in box mixes of cakes, the chemistry that's involved in raincoats that crack as opposed to those that don't, the chemistry that's involved in the things that you use in a kitchen, in floor coverings, these kinds of things, you see. While solving some of these problems has value to men because of the marketing value of an idea, sometimes it's of a different kind of value to a woman, and they're likely to push research in different areas. Does that make sense at all? Okay.
I'd add to that, Dean, Dow Chemical, I visited there shortly, and they were interested in women because of the cosmetics field. And I know while we're up there, he was showing us the new aspirin tablet, which had chlorophyll, was green, and he said that was for stinking headaches, and a woman had designed that.
I'd like the privilege of asking the last question. for having women architects then, or design the home for maintenance, so that people to take care of and so on, as would be for the pattern. So we see them that way also. Good. Good. So we're very pleased that you chose to come today. We hope that